Welcome to Eastside Group's podcast, where each week Pastor Chad Mann and Emily Watson will chat about the need for discipleship, what it is, and how we as believers and as a church are working towards being disciples who make disciples. If you're new to our podcast, Eastside is a church who exists to transform Fort Smith and beyond. Our purpose here at Eastside is to gather, grow, and go. Learn more about us at myeastside.tv. Let's get started.
And welcome back to Eastside Group's podcast. Hey, Chad.
Hey, Emily.
Hey, Aaron.
What's up?
Hey, Aaron, who's off to the side behind the scenes.
Aaron's so great to put up with us. We were just catching up on some Dancing with the Stars news and talking about also just
life
and interpretation of scriptures and all kinds of stuff. So I feel a little tired this morning because I had to get up early for my D group.
Yeah.
And 6:30 a.m. for me is not a time I normally see, actually.
Yeah. And when it's rainy, that kind of adds to the weariness or that sleepy feeling, I'm sure.
It does, definitely. And so today we're talking about...
Well, hold on. Let me ask you, how did your D group go?
It was good.
All right.
I feel like, this is our fourth week to me. Mm-hmm. And we kind of came into the group. I knew two girls fairly well. One I don't know that well. And they don't know each other.
Sure.
But I feel like I kind of had to be the glue as the leader, you know, like kind of be the one to keep conversation going. But I feel like now we're finally to the point where, like, I can just sit back and be a part of conversation, but they are good at connecting now. Yeah. And that's great.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm seeing a little bit more relationship
And
building.
this is week 4 for you? Is that right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's been going good. We go through our highs and lows, and we've been really good to keep up with kind of what's going on in each other's lives. And it's cool to see what God's teaching us through the book of Luke.
Yeah.
And, like, all these stories that Jesus shares and all these parables, I'm like, these are for me too.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody's doing the work. Excuse me. I don't say do the work. But, everyone's doing their Hear Journal.
Everybody's doing their Hear
Journals. Memorizing scripture already.
Everybody's showing up.
Yeah.
Like, it's been really good.
That's exciting to hear.
So when we talk about who's your one, you know, like who are we being intentional with, one of the girls brought her one to church on Sunday.
Awesome.
And that was so cool.
That is a huge encouragement.
And we've even been talking about, like, habits that we've had or even kind of addictions to our go-tos and things. And a couple of them have shared, like, because we do talk about it in our group, that they're like, I know I have to give an answer when we get together, so I just didn't do it this week. Or I just, like, reduced it this week.
And so today we're talking about part 2 of disciple making fails.
Yeah.
And one that you wanted to bring up in this episode was what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Which is
questions.
Failing to not ask questions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So I think a lot of times, we can go through the motions of here's kind of the agenda. Let's go through our highs and lows. Let's share the Hear Journals. Let's pray together. But questions aren't being asked. And so as we get to know each other, on week 1, I'm not going to come out and say, like, what's your deepest, darkest secret that we can hold you accountable to?
Sure.
But people just begin to share.
Yeah, they get more comfortable, open up.
Because they shared last week. Well, then this week, I'm going to say, hey, how's that going?
Yeah.
And, then we go from there.
Yeah.
Or we've actually been sharing our testimonies these first 4 weeks.
And that is what helps people to
That
open
helps
up.
a lot. So there's 4 of us in my group, and 3 have like the same story, or parts of their story are the exact same.
Yeah.
Like they all went through a particular thing. And I'm like, wow, we would not have known that if we wouldn't have shared our story.
Yeah. And
so even as those stories have come up, like, we ask each other questions about them, like, how'd that make you feel? Or did that change your relationship with the Lord then? How's it different now? And so I think sometimes as leaders, we don't want to step on toes, especially as a people pleaser that I am. I don't want to ask hard questions.
Yeah, and I don't want to do it in front of everyone.
And I don't want to do it in front of everyone. But also, like, will they ask me hard questions?
Yeah.
And I want them to ask me questions. But I just think sometimes, like, when we don't begin to ask things, then it's just kind of, we lack getting to know each other. We lack bringing issues about. Because sometimes, like, sin in our lives can be exposed when we ask questions. And not to call people out in front of the group, but just...
and we're lacking we lack providing accountability.
Yeah.
You lack accountability when you don't ask questions. And I do think, having testimony shared at first, and I think, the leader going first is usually a good idea. And then each week as you're meeting, you're asking, hey, next week you're going to share your testimony.
Yep.
Hey, Joe, next week it'll be you. That way they're preparing themselves like, hey, I'm going to have to share my story, And it helps you to get to know one another. Sometimes it's, immediate where your group might feel more comfortable, in sharing more personal things because they've heard a piece of a person's testimony that go, hey, well, they've kind of been through similar things as me, so I feel safe. I feel safer. We had one this year that, when he shared his testimony, I mean, it was all out there, because sometimes when a guy's like, share your testimony, okay, and they can be surfacey. You can just tell, You're like, that's okay. As we get to know each other, we'll grow in transparency. And when he wants to share, he can, if he wants to, But we had a gentleman in our D group this year who was just very transparent. And so it was like, whoa, okay, well, there's this, and it became one of those things where, like, immediately our group felt, well, not just comfortable in asking questions, but obligated to ask questions each week, and even throughout the week, not just our meeting, but throughout the week, send a text, how are you doing, or you struggling? Can we pray for you specifically this week in that area, so.
Yeah. And, even as we ask, even as we hear each other's stories, I've asked the question, let's say they, when they were younger, they went through seasons of just really, deep depression or just suicidal thoughts. So I've even come out of that asking, is that something that you still struggle with? Is that something that is still a daily battle for you? Because that helps us also to know how to serve this person or minister to this person, or at least just to know that about them. Yeah. And even when I think about our job to ask questions, people can answer how they want to answer, I
know, yeah.
But it's our job just to ask. And I always feel like when I do that, it opens up a door to whatever they want to tell me. Sometimes when I think about how discipleship feels evangelism, if I think about talking to someone about Jesus who probably doesn't have a relationship, I can just say, what do you know about Jesus? Or, when you think about church, is that a good thing or a bad thing to you? Questions like that, it communicates that you just want to get to know someone.
Yeah, asking questions shows that you care. I mean, and I know sometimes you can ask questions in your tone or the way you look at someone, or maybe even where a person is in their walk or where they are at in life might feel judged because you're asking that question. These are all issues of the heart for the one being asked the questions and for the one who is asking the questions. And so when we're asking questions, good questions to those that are in our group, we always do it with a tone of care, with the purpose of care, not just, hey man, how's it going this week?
Yeah.
Got your stuff together. That's not what we're talking about. Just hey, you shared this last week, this area, and man, it's been a few days, and I just want to connect with you and ask, is it any better? Is there a way I can pray for you? I mean, that's showing that you haven't forgotten.
Right.
You've thought about them. You are asking out of care and concern.
And sometimes those questions might come aside from the group.
Yes.
Maybe after group time.
Oftentimes they do.
It's just a one-on-one, hey, you mentioned this. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Or, what's up with that? Tell me more about it. Or how can I help you?
And that's why we should encourage our group to interact throughout the week. Whether that's going to have coffee or lunch or just a phone call or text message. Just checking on each other. I mean, we try to encourage that as much as possible. If we go from Thursday to Thursday and there wasn't any kind of a message or interaction or something, we're not really growing together like we should, and that's an area where I know my group, we need to grow in that. We've had kind of reboot session this last couple months, but I really believe, there's been some good things take place, and I know the end of the year will be kind of the time for us to think about multiplying, replicating groups, and it's one of those things where you're like, man, I've only got maybe 5 or 6 more months here, you're like, what can I be better at as a leader? Well, I know I can be better at asking questions, and I also know that I can be better at connecting with those guys through the week. We meet on Thursday mornings, so from Friday to Wednesday, what am I doing? Am I talking to them? Am I praying for them? Am I letting them know my prayers for them or whatnot?
And so as we're talking about these disciple-making fails, we've talked about the lack of asking questions. And what's something that you would say?
I would say the big one I wanted to make sure we got out today was a lack of teaching them or equipping them to share their faith. Evangelism. I think that's a huge part of what we're doing here. Disciple making is about growing in our walk with the Lord, glorifying the Lord in all that we do. And part of that is also, a big part of that is being part of the Great Commission and sharing the gospel with people, with our family, our neighbors, our friends, whoever God gives us. God gives us people. I really believe that. You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to be a D group leader. You don't have to be a Sunday school teacher. If you are a believer, you are called to be a witness. Jesus said that in Acts 1:8. He said that in Matthew 28. This is the call of the believer, is to share the gospel with the world. And so what I want to do in the last part of my year is you talk about who is your one, and let's start praying for them. And let's start talking about interacting with them and holding our group accountable. Hey, are you engaging with your one? Are you reaching out to them? Have you been praying for them? Like the person in your group, they've already invited their one to church. Those are awesome steps. But you also want to be able to equip your group to have gospel conversation with them. And so, we do a memory verse every week, okay? The last couple of weeks have been kind of reviewing some memory verses as we've been going through Revelation. We've reviewed some verses from Romans that we have done. And in the next, probably last quarter of the year, I'll focus more on memorizing a gospel outline, and we're going to look at 3 circles, which is our life conversation guide, which is Life on Mission. And this is coming from North American Mission Board Send Network, and it's a wonderful way to learn how to share the gospel. And it's called Gospel Conversations. So it's not just all right, stop right there, listen to this, and you go through the 6 or 7 points or whatever. And I'm not against doing that.
You're asking questions, though.
Right. This is really more centered on having conversation that could be ongoing. And it's not just a one-time conversation, but continual conversation. It also gives you some great ways to prompt the gospel conversation with your one or with anyone. Because it talks about life. We live in a broken world, surrounded by broken lives, broken relationships, broken systems. This is easy. You could be sitting in a barber shop, which I know I'm not doing, but I'm bald for people who aren't able to know that. But, sitting in a waiting line somewhere, or maybe you're in a lobby and there's something on the news and people, we have conversations sometimes when we're not staring down at our phones, avoiding conversation. Sometimes like, man, isn't that horrible? Man, can you believe this? The world is such a mess. Somebody says that to you. Right there, that should prompt you to go, oh, wow, here's an open door for me to share about the gospel. Yes, it is a broken world. There is brokenness, but there is a Redeemer, and his name is Jesus.
Or even like when a coworker, talks about a bad circumstance or maybe a death in her family, and she's super upset. It's an open door for you to speak hope and encouragement to her. And speaking of like these practical things that we're talking about, well, first of all, this Life on Mission resource is also available in app
App
format,
Store. That's right.
In the App Store. So it's a great app to download on your phone, Life on Mission. But I think another disciple-making fail could be one where we forget to give practical how-to steps. You know what I mean? Where we talk about maybe sin in our lives, or we talk about, how to love others better, or how do we not be anxious about anything? How do we do these things? And sometimes we talk about them, but they're super abstract. And so part of disciple making is giving people a goal, and then help charting those steps for them to reach that goal. You know what I mean? So it's like, if I need to share the gospel, how can I practically do that? Well, here's some practical ways, just like we shared, these open doors that can come up in conversations. Sometimes we forget about that when it comes to disciple making. We don't give practical steps for how to accomplish a goal, and I think it's our responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's so many things we can bring up. And there's been so many that we've had a second episode to disciple making fails. But I want to encourage anyone who's in a leadership role, leading a D group, or getting ready to lead a D group. I think something where you're going to fail. Okay, you're going to fail if you don't do these things we've talked about. What I mean by fail is you're going to make some mistakes. There's probably going to be some hiccups. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you don't need to be leading one. I'm just saying, you're missing some opportunities for growth if you don't do these things. That's what we're talking about when we say fails. So one fail that I would also bring ahead here is to not grow in your leadership knowledge. Yeah. I think it's important for anyone who's leading a discipleship group to be coached, to be equipped by their pastors, or, if there's, like us, you and I are overseeing men's and women's ministries here at our church. You and I are working on, this plan for disciple making in our church. So you and I are working hard to learn, to grow in what we're doing, and how to lead others, and we want to equip them. Well, I think people shouldn't just depend on not only their ministry leaders or pastors, but it's okay to read books on your own. I think that's a huge thing, always grow, always be growing, okay? Readers are leaders, and leaders are readers. Yeah. So I would say, if you're interested in growing in your discipleship, as far as like strategies or how you view it, or just to be encouraged, you could pick up books by Bill Hull. He's like one of my favorite guys in discipleship. I've read several books by Bill Hull, okay? So anyone listening want to pick up a book on discipleship, look at Bill Hull, okay? Jesus Christ Disciple Maker, that was the first book I read by Bill Hull, and it just set me on a course where I'm like, this is how I'm supposed to do it. Yeah. Like, I can do this right now, Or replicate stuff through Lifeway. You could pick that up, or at Amazon. Robbie Gallaty, his Growing Up series.
Those are great.
Those are great reads. Yes, they're not overwhelming, and they're very, very practical. But there's a bunch. I mean, there's so many out there.
Even Disciple Her by Candy Gallaty is a great resource too.
And so, if anyone out there wants recommendations for books on discipleship, just email us. Yeah, we'd love to give you some resources. Yeah. But as our time is kind of wrapping up here, is there any other fail? I know there's one, and I think we want to reiterate it. And it's the one you started with in our first episode on disciple-making fails. The biggest disciple-making fail is, do you remember
not even disciple.
To not do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I even think of, when people come to faith in Christ and then they're baptized as a symbol of what's happened on the inside, and then it stops there, which we should see that as an open door. Yeah. That's the beginning of their discipleship journey. And a lot of times, if we're intentional with R1 and we lead people to Christ, and then we stop there, but that's just the beginning of it. So sometimes not even trying is the biggest fail that I think we can make.
Yeah, that's something that the guys at Replicate brought up in some of their stuff in the past is, oftentimes we have viewed baptism as like the finish line. Like, all right, we got it done. Woo! But it's the starting line. When that person makes that profession of faith and says, I'm following Jesus, it is the start of their path, their avenue, their life in discipleship and growing. So the church, we as a church have to be ready to receive people, lead them to Jesus, and ready to receive them into disciple-making groups so that they would grow in their faith, so that they would become disciples, so that they would get out and share the gospel with other people. Yeah. And so that's what I'm excited about with this whole thing at Eastside. The more groups we have, the more people we're going to be reaching, and the more people that get one with the gospel and are getting saved, they're going to need to be funneled into disciple-making relationships. You know? So the more groups we have going and starting throughout the year, the easier it is to get them into those. And so that's my dream, you know, and I'm excited as I think about the future and the years to come, seeing people come to faith at Eastside, getting saved, and then our people just saying, hey, let's go. Follow me.
Exactly.
You know, follow me as I follow Christ.
Yeah.
Let me pour into you and encourage you, equip you.
Yeah. And if you are listening and you are interested in being a part of a D group and want to start one, we've got some information for you.
Yep.
We'd love to get that to you because D groups are always starting. There's not a start for everybody and a finish for everybody.
Right.
It's just, you know, as you're ready to start it, let's do it.
Let's do it.
And so let us know, Emily at myeastside.tv or Chad at myeastside.tv, and we'll get you more resources.
That's right.
So until next time,
make disciples.
Make disciples.
Thanks for tuning in to Eastside Group's podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share our podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'll see you in the next one.